Welcome to the Happy Half Hour.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
For all you halfwits out there, like you, Steve and me.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I'm Joseph Mojo McCarthy. I am the co-host with Steve Hayes of the brand new pilot episode of the Happy Half Hour. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm not a half-wit. I'm a full wit. I'm a full nitwit. I thought I
Full.
was a co-host. How can you be the
Well, you
co-host if
are.
I'm the co-host?
Well, that's what
But
the
you
nice
said
thing
you're the
about
co-host.
co-hosts. You can have two.
Oh, wow.
I know
Look at
it's
that. Imagine
revolutionary.
that.
It's revolutionary. Speaking of revolutionary, that's the war that started everything for us to be here, right now. I mean, sometimes we think history is so far removed from the present. But the truth is, if history didn't unfold exactly as it did, there's no way you and I are sitting here having this conversation right now, right?
True. I'm waiting to hear how the Revolutionary War fits into all this.
Well, I was just thinking, like today's Memorial Day, right? So we're trying to
Mm,
celebrate, not trying to, we are celebrating. And hopefully, the part that gets lost in all this is the remembering. Why do we even have a Memorial Day? I mean, for most people, hey, it's another opportunity to have a picnic, to drink, to get together with my friends. Nothing wrong with any of that. That's no judgment.
right.
But what gets lost in the mix is that Memorial Day, as I know from my own family, and we'll get to that story, Memorial Day is designed for us to remember that the freedom that we enjoy came with a price. Freedom isn't
Yeah,
free, right? Freedom isn't free.
100%.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know Steve O, you as the host of the Happy Life Studio podcast, you often say you're the what say talk about the
The
official.
official podcast of the holidays,
Yes, and why?
unofficially.
Let's talk a little bit why that. You have a reason behind that. Why are you the podcast of the holidays?
I think holidays, there's power to holidays. You have millions of people all across whatever country you're from, and sometimes across the world that are focused on the same day, the same concept, the same whatever. Why would we not tap into that? I don't
Hmm.
understand why people like when I look for podcasts and live cast and such. I mean, if you ever search, get me a podcast or live cast on a particular holiday, it's tough, especially like when it comes to the big ones, even like Christmas. I don't understand why shows don't just tap into that. I don't know if I mean, you can take what you're going to talk about anyway, and you could totally shroud it in that holiday and tweak it to match that holiday. I just feel like it helps when we're all focused on the same thing at the same time. It helps us to realize that we're a part of, something bigger. And speaking of the podcast, I just put it out a few hours ago today, but you said something that, Memorial Day and how it should be celebrated. And so happy Memorial Day, everybody. We're thankful that you came
Yes,
along with us. This is all new to us. We've been wanting to do this for a long time.
yes, we
But
have.
General George S. Patton said this about celebrating on Memorial Day. He said, "It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died." Get that? He said it's foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. And
What?
I think it's because, and what he says next is, rather, we should thank God that such men lived.
Mm. Say that
Wow.
again. The
Well,
second half.
man, isn't that good? It is
Oh
just
my
so, and
God.
it reminds me of the Dr. Seuss quote that says, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened." It reminds me a little bit of that. But again, General George S. Patton said, "It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived."
Wow.
Two different perspectives on the exact same event that happened.
That's amazing. Yeah, I don't think I've heard that quote before. If I have, I've forgotten it, which that wouldn't be surprising me either. Right, which is really interesting. I just said, and I didn't mean to say that. Maybe I've heard that before and I've forgotten it. So, one of the really important parts about this holiday that we want to talk about today is the remembering, right? I mean, when 9/11 happened, and every anniversary of 9/11, it was about remember, always remember,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
really what Memorial Day is about. And George Patton twisted it a bit for me in a really interesting way that remembering isn't just about the mourning, because that's actually what happens when someone does pass away, but it's the thanking, right? The gratitude, which is
yeah,
very interesting, the gratitude that the people who gave their lives to secure the freedoms that we're enjoying right now, thankful
yeah.
that they lived. I really love that because that's very personal to me.
Yeah, me too. And I, I think that, and I said this in my podcast today. I think that the people that gave their lives for us gave their lives for this very reason. They gave their life so we could have barbecues in our backyard, hang out with the neighbors, hang out with friends and family, go to the cemetery and have a bit of, respectful solitude, whatever. They gave their lives so that we would have the freedom to do whatever we want to do on this day. And I think that they like it when we get together and we celebrate over a dog and a burger. But I also think it's kind of cool when we pause before we take a bite and we just think. We become, like Patton said, we're thankful that these men lived in the first place. And I even made a challenge today, kind of a slight challenge in the podcast, talking about how maybe every bite. Why not pause for every bite? Before you take a bite, you pause just for a half of a second and just say thank you under your breath. Or you think about somebody or a war movie or somebody in a war movie and how that represents real life and such like that. But what a great holiday, right? I love Memorial Day. It's like the unofficial start of the summer.
That's right. Yeah. It's fascinating what you just said. I never thought about this before, Steve-O. You said, what if we just stopped for a second, right, to give thanks before we took a bite of the dog? Which to me, that's exactly, or echoes anyway, what I was taught when I was a kid to pray right before a meal. So
Yeah.
before I pray for a meal, before we would eat, our family would say, stop and give thanks. It was called giving thanks or say grace, right? But interesting, if you go back in history, the whole point of that was actually to thank the animals who sacrificed their lives to provide
Interesting.
nourishment for me, right? So it wasn't just thanking
Wow.
God for provision, but it was thanking the sheep or the cow or the whatever it was that you were eating to say, thank you that you lived and you died so that I would have the nourishment I need to continue my life. That's what it was. Thank you to the grain, thank you to the fruit, right? That grew
I did
up.
not know that.
Yes, for no other
So that
reason.
movie Avatar, what I even talked about that in the podcast as well. I don't mean to keep harping on the
That's
podcast,
fine.
but we
No,
keep
talk
talking
about
about
it.
it's cool when all that stuff like repeats itself. But I
Yes.
talked about, the movie Avatar where they would say, I see you. And when they would kill an animal, they'd say, I see you. And now you see it in movies and shows all the time, people in those situations, or like Alone or some of these survival shows where they're, I see you. There's something about being seen. And I think that's what Memorial Day is all about, to see. I mean, who cares if I have to stop and have burgers with family or friends, whatever, to help me remember to see those great, incredible people that sacrificed their life for me. Not all of them died on the battlefield. Some of them
Right.
went and fought on the battlefield, but I guarantee they brought some stuff back with them. Well,
Sure.
man, whatever it takes for me to remember them, is it's worth it to me. And
Yeah.
you've got a concept on remember. You're a wordsmith. For those of you who don't know, Joe is my good friend. We've known each other for a long time. But Joe, you've been more of a wordsmith in the last couple of years than I've ever. You love to play with words. You love to break them down. You love to separate them. You that with us a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So, my mind is it's very funky how it's designed sometimes, right? So I looked at the word remember. What if I took the word remember and I put a colon between the re and member? So which is like reason, then the colon, and then member. Remember is taking the parts, the fragments, and putting them back together. It's remembering. So this is a different way of thinking about the word member. So let's talk about let's the members of my body are my arms, my eyes, my legs, whatever, the different members, like those members of your body. Well, what if they all got blown apart, like in a step on a landmine? So to remember them is to take all the fragments, to bring them back together to make them whole again, right? And I think, wow, that's a really fascinating way, and that's what I love about words. Fascinating way to look at that same word. Remember, all you guys to think about it. No, what if remembering is actually taking the fragments and bringing them back together to see the whole, to make them whole again? And so, I just think that's fascinating that remembering is part of becoming whole. We talk a lot about Steve in your podcast and mine, which is mojo.studio. Steve, where do people find your podcast before we move on too much further?
If you just search HappyLife.studio, or if you search Happy Life Studios, you'll find us. Our webpage is HappyLife.studio. You can get it there as well. And yours is Mojo.studio as well, right? Mojoe, correct?
Yeah, just like on the screen, mojoe.studio,
Yeah.
right? And how many episodes are you into your podcast now, Steve?
We're close to 500 now.
Holy
So,
smokes!
and we only do like one a week, sometimes more. But so we've been doing this for, for a good minute or two.
You must be
Anyway,
floored.
back to what you
Yeah,
said as well in your podcast.
yeah,
You were onto something here. I can't wait to hear it.
yeah. So I'm just, my mind is working overtime to say, well, what if remembering is a process of taking stuff that's been blown apart, fragmented, metaphorically or actually physically, and bring it back together to see what it should be like, what it could have been like when it was all whole again. And I think really part of our experience in life is to remember, to become whole again. Like everything gets fragmented all the time in our lives. Our minds, our thoughts, and our relationships, they get fragmented for lots of different reasons. But really, instead of the pursuit of happiness, which is kind of what our country is based on, what if we're searching for wholeness? And happiness is an outcome.
Mm,
Happiness is like the gravy. Happiness is what happens. So here's the picture in my mind, Steve, is that when I pursue happiness, I think in my mind it's like a wild rabbit. And if I pursue the rabbit, it runs away. If I pursue the rabbit, it runs away. It's like feels like it's under attack. It's being threatened. So happiness to me is like this little bunny, and every time I pursue it, poof, it's gone. And it's elusive. It's very elusive. But when I pursue wholeness, wholeness means like being calm, being just bringing everything back into center and being at peace. And then I see this little bunny called happiness. It's like, ooh, there's no more threat. Nobody's pursuing me.
hmm.
And he comes up and he sits down next to me and becomes like this my little pal. And I think, gosh, if I pursue wholeness, which is remembering, bringing all the parts back together, making them one, then happiness actually comes and becomes my companion rather than always running away because I'm pursuing it. I'm pursuing it. Does that make any sense to you?
I love that. I love that concept. We talk about that quite a bit at Happy Life Studios. Just that we're stop chasing happy. Happy is already there,
It is.
right? But when you're whole, happy follows that. And I love that. I also that whole concept of remembering. To me, it also is. I'm not when I remember. I I connect with those people that have fought for me
Yeah.
in my country, fought in the wars, have served in the military. That's fragmented too. I don't know who they are. There's one of the quotes I came across for our podcast today on Memorial Day. It talked about we don't know them all, but we owe them all.
Ooh.
But when I take
Yeah.
time to remember, I am now connecting myself to these incredible human beings, these incredible heroes, which you and I both describe a hero as a person who does
The right thing at the right time
at
for
the
the right
right
reason.
time. Yeah, yeah. And so I think that when we remember, we're also bringing them and us together, and I think that
Yeah.
that's a powerful thing. And that's a good segue for me because I want to connect with your uncle.
Yeah.
I think for this Memorial Day, your uncle was an incredible man. Talk about a modern day hero. And you have some great memories of him. But he was in the war as well. And I don't know, I would love it if you would tap into some of the memories of your uncle and what kind of hero maybe he was to you, or wherever you want to take it.
Yeah. Yeah. So this, I love that was a great setup because you talk about, I don't know all of the people that have fought for my freedom, but I can tell you about one, and this will be part of what we're talking about this Memorial Day. So let's memorialize, let's remember and celebrate and thank God for this life,
Yeah,
which was my uncle Gil.
yeah.
His name was Gil Atchison, and he was like a modern, like a real life, larger than life superhero to me because when I was little, my uncle Gil went to Vietnam when I think he was probably 19, 18 or 19. He goes to Vietnam. He becomes a helicopter pilot. He becomes a helicopter squadron leader. And he actually gets shot down in Vietnam
Mm.
5 different times. His helicopter that he
Whoa,
was piloting gets shot down twice behind enemy lines. And
whoa,
somehow, and he can't even explain it. Somehow he walked away from all of these crashes, twice behind the enemy lines, and was able to survive things that I can't even imagine. Right? And he couldn't talk a lot about what happened in Vietnam because it was so atrocious, to use his word. But my uncle, for the rest of his life, like you say, maybe he didn't die at Vietnam, but he brought a lot of stuff back. Well, what he brought back was the trauma, not only in his body of getting crashing because he had operations his whole life to help repair all the damage in his body. And ultimately, he died of complications from Agent Orange many years later. But Agent Orange, which he was exposed to in Vietnam, he brought back with him, and eventually it ate his body from the inside out, even though he's one of the strongest, most determined people I ever met. In fact, he came back, as most Vietnam vets did, not as a hero, but as a villain, because our country at the
Yeah.
time was like, Vietnam sucks, and why did we send our
Yeah.
troops there? And so the people, these young men who weren't even 21 yet, they come back after fighting for our country, and nobody's celebrating them. They're saying,
Yeah.
yeah, Vietnam sucks. And my uncle, I mean, he's a hero on so many levels, but he says, I just determined to take all of what I learned and all that I went through and channel it into success. And so he became a self-made millionaire. He started several businesses. He's a brilliant. He's a Mensa. He's just on many levels. You know, as a little kid, I can't
So
imagine
he's
being able to
Mensa.
know him.
So he's a
Yeah,
genius, you're
he's
saying.
a genius.
And
Absolute
you
genius.
said, can you say that again? You said he decided to take all these things that happened to him and use them? Is that what
Yeah,
you said he did?
yeah. So rather than be a victim of them, he decided, and I don't know where this came from, but he decided that everything he went through is something that he can use. It's all now useful experience, useful information, useful knowledge, wisdom to become successful, right? And he did.
Wow.
He started several different businesses, sold them, became a multimillionaire, really just out of sheer will and determination. And this is also the same guy who couldn't sleep through the night without being woken with night terrors, which is not uncommon for someone that's been in war, because all these scenes would play themselves out in his imagination. He'd wake up screaming, this very brave man, and then you can imagine the operations, et cetera, et cetera. But I never heard my uncle Gil ever talk negative about his experience, never talk negative about our country, not even talk negative about the fact that the country wasn't appreciative of what he did. He just used it all as fuel, right? Rather than being victim, he's like,
Wow.
okay, I have all this experience. How am I going to use it? So he comes back from Vietnam and does what he does, and I'm just fascinated by the guy, right? I'm hanging on his every word. And here's one story I want to share real quick before we run out of time. Is that in Vietnam, the policy was, and this may have changed, the policy was that if you made it through your tour up to the very last week before you were to go home, if you made it that far, they would not require you to go into battle because that last week was like, we don't want you dying 1 week before you're going home. So if you made it to
Yeah.
the last week of your tour, you were able to bow out with no shame, bow out of any combat. So my uncle was a squadron leader and had been through ridiculous amounts of skirmishes, and many of his compadres had been killed in war. He got to that sweet spot where it's like 1 week left before he was to go home, and in that week they had been preparing for this giant offensive, which of course he would be a squadron leader in that particular battle. And so his commanding officer, whatever, said, "You made it this far. We don't want you dying 1 week before you go home, so you can stay back here in the camp until we ship you home." And Gil's like, "How can I do that? How can I send my friends and my companions into battle when I'm their leader and just sit back and watch while some of them are going to die? Many of them won't even come back from this battle. We know that for sure." He says, "I don't. I'm not gonna. Can I say no? Can I say?" And the guy says, "It's up to you." His commanding officer. So my uncle Gil, with 1 week left of his tour, goes back into he says the worst battle that he'd been in, which that means a lot. And knowing that he very very well might
Yeah.
not have survived, and many of his friends didn't survive that battle, he did. He came back. But I'm thinking, talk about courage. Michael Gill got medals
Yeah.
of valor. He got Purple Hearts. I mean, the highest level of awards for courage. And he took all that back with him to the country that he loved, that he defended for me, right? And he used all of that courage to do extraordinary things in his life. But here's the thing. My Uncle Gil, when he passed away from complications from Agent Orange, um, I know him well enough to know that what he wanted most of all was to create and preserve the freedom so that his nephew, which is me, would be able to live a great life, right? He went to Vietnam not just to fight in a battle for a war thing, right? Or even for the idea of his country, but for his family. He has a daughter who's also went through the military, etc. But you know, the motivation. Why does anybody put themselves in harm's way? Why does
Yeah.
anybody jump in front of a train?
And
It's really about love for country, love for others. It wasn't love for himself, because he was putting himself in harm's way and very well could have died there and ended up dying from complications of Agent Orange, as I said. So that's a lot of information, but to say Uncle Gil, my Uncle Gil, God rest his soul, is a representation not just of Vietnam, but of every war that has been fought on behalf of our country so that we can have this conversation without fear of imprisonment, that we have the
yeah.
freedom of speech. In fact, I could say really negative things about our country and about our president if I so wanted to, without being fear that I'm going to be thrown in prison. And my uncle would say, "That's what I fought for." So you'd have freedom, right? And so
Yeah.
what we're doing now is actually a way for me to honor and be grateful for the people like my uncle Gil who died, so that we could have freedom of speech.
Yeah. And the world is full of heroes like that never get the kudos. They never get the representation. And I wish the social media platforms would push more, because people are telling stories like this, but it just feels like we love to push the stuff that creates panic, that creates anxiety, that creates hatred. I mean, if you could just go back to your Uncle Gil and say, "But Uncle Gil, you gave your life, and it literally gave his life to the point of, even when he was alive, the price that he had to pay because of Agent Orange, because of the PTSD, because of all that stuff." And I want to say, but Gil, do you realize that there can be people that don't have the same political party as you? Do you know there's going to be people that disagree with you vehemently? Do you know that people gonna, even like you said, that gonna trash the country that you fought for? He would still do it.
Of
You know what
course.
I'm saying? I mean, that's the point of freedom. When we use our freedom, there's actually an ancient saying. It's been around for thousands of years. It's actually in the Bible. And it says if you use your freedom basically to take away other people's freedom, if you use your freedom to backbite, to destroy, to hurt, to harm, then you destroy freedom. And it says, where will your precious freedom be then? And I think sometimes we're so, these days, I feel like we're so worried about information instead of inspiration.
Hmm.
Inspiration, you and I have talked about that. It means to be in spirit, right? Inspire.
Right.
Versus information, which is, listen, if you don't agree the way I agree, I thank God that all the people that went in the army, that our army didn't have to split into two halves, right, when we fought the war. Okay, all those that are on this political party, you fight over here, and all. I mean, civil war is one of the worst wars that you can have, when you have
Right.
war with people that should have your back. So all you people out there, all you other gills out there, and maybe you didn't get shot down 5 times. Who gets shot down 5 times and survives?
I know.
But we know you went out and showed up every day, and you went, and when it was scary, and you went out there and you did your job. You followed, and even those that came back from Vietnam, it's like, what are they supposed to do? Their country called them, right? It's not like they started the war. They were treated like they started the war. They said, "My country called, I'll serve," right? And they saw some terrible things, but they kept serving. They kept doing their thing, and my hat goes off, to these people.
Yeah. Well, it's just it's so easy to forget. So remembering is so
Never,
important. So forgetting
yeah,
is easy. Remembering is hard. Remembering takes intention. Remembering remembering takes time, energy, effort. Forgetting,
yeah,
well, that's kind of like the default. So I think what Steve and I are trying to get at here in this conversation is that whether it's Memorial Day or any day that you wake up and you're free to make choices without fear of imprisonment, whether that's your religion or your speech or right to bear arms or whatever it is. And here's the thing that came to mind while you're talking, Steve, is that so many times in social media, we listen with the ears that say, "Do I agree with you?" If I agree with you,
yeah,
you're on my side. And if I don't agree with you, you're on the other side. And we've created a civil war of sorts, a modern civil war in social media. You're either for me or
yeah,
against me, even though we're on the same team, right? And
right.
so what I'm suggesting, Steve, and I want to get your take on this, is rather than listening with ears, do I agree with you? I want to suspend that because that's divisive. I want to listen with ears like, do I understand you? Right? Do I understand you? And
Mm,
that's the freedom that Gil died for, and so many others. It's not so that we would all agree. And like you said, Gil knows very well that people will disagree with his political party and with all of his ideology. That's what freedom's about. That's what he died for, so that people could disagree without fear,
yeah,
right? So I
yeah,
just think whatever we can do, people, whoever's listening, whoever's tuning in, Steve, even it's just for Steve and I, just to remember that when I'm listening to somebody who very well will have ideas that I don't agree with, who cares? It's not about whether I agree with you. It's, do I understand
yeah,
you? Because if I can understand where you're coming from, then already I have a connection. And we can be friends, we can be family without being divided, without the civil war within our very own country
yeah,
that's happening in social media.
yeah. And that's up to us. We can't control a lot of the other powers that are pushing things, but we can control whether we're going to allow someone like Gil's life to be in vain. You know, if we're going to allow someone else to try to tell us to hate someone or bully somebody or disagree with somebody, I think there's power in disagreement. And I like what you said too about, listening to understand. I'm pretty sure it was Stephen Covey who said it, but he said, seek first to understand, then be understood.
Mm.
And we're always trying to make sure people understand us. You don't understand me. You don't know me. Well, is that all my fault? You know what I'm saying? I think it's the same thing as chasing happy. When I'm chasing to be understood, like I just keep raising my voice. I keep making sure you understand that you understand. If you knew what I knew, then you'd agree with me. I'm just not, whatever the case may be. But when we take the time, it's the same thing as remembering. When you remember, you have to pause and you have to listen.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the, we are involved in a bunch of, there's a thing out there called hurry sickness.
Mm.
We are so busy all the time. Anxiety loves to follow busyness. A lot of the negative stuff loves to follow. We get so busy that it begins to mess up our happy, it begins to mess up our life. And there needs to come a time, nothing wrong with being busy, but when we're constantly, the RPMs, nothing wrong with you hitting 7,000 RPMs in your car, right? But if you keep it there, the whole engine's going to shut down. And I think that when we remember, when we pause, when we seek to understand, instead of trying to make sure you understand where I'm coming from, Joe, I think one of the questions that we need to ask each other is, tell me your story. What's it like to be you? What do you think about this situation? When I seek to understand you, it actually begins to change my viewpoints a little bit too, because now you're not an opinion to me, you're a person to me.
Right.
And I have a concept with you, I have a relationship with you. The members of us two have come together. We have remembered ourselves with each other. And I just think that whole idea of pausing, pausing, even right now, that little bit of silence, it's so healthy. It's so good. It helps us to remember, to bring the members of humanity, the members of our fragmented parts of ourselves, to bring those together when we remember. We can remember all the negative things that have happened. We can remember the negative things that we do. But I think Joe and I are here talking a little bit more about remembering the good things, remembering the Gills out there. And despite all the pain and all the junk, Gil still did what he did, and he used all that. He remembered himself and became quite a force, at least in your life, Joe, which I know he did with a lot of other people. But if he didn't remember, if he didn't pause, if he didn't put himself back together, that stuff will come back and haunt you. And if we just think we just mask the pain and cover it up and la 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 la, I'm not listening, that comes back to haunt us later on. I think remembering helps fix that.
Mm. Yes, remembering. So I love all that because we are one human race. And in spite of all the differences, and by the way, there's no two humans that are exactly the same. So if you want to divide us up, we can do that. We can always find what's different. But let's find out what's the
Yeah,
same. What do we have in common? We're all
right.
built out of the same stuff, right? So just to finish
Yeah.
this particular episode, Steve, would you go back and read the George Patton quote again? Because I think it circles back now in the context of what we've just shared. It has a whole another meaning.
Yeah. And before I do, too, I want to tag really quick for a half a minute or so. One other thing is that one of the quotes that I used today was by a doctor by the name of Dr. Kurt Thompson. And he said that everyone is looking for someone looking for them. That's
Mm.
the whole concept of being seen again. Everyone is looking for someone looking for them. Everybody needs a body. So let's be that body for somebody else. Let's stop the people are looking for someone looking for them. Let's say, hey, the search is over. I'm right here. I care about you. You matter to me. You know, the point I'm trying to make, though, really with this whole thing is that for those of you that are listening that struggle with insecurity, you feel like your value isn't worth that much. There are a lot of people out there that gave that. This isn't a guilt thing at all. This is hopefully to make you feel better. These people out there fought for you. Don't look any further. People, if you're looking for someone looking for you, somebody that to be, these guys gave their bodies so that we could be somebody. Gil gave his body
Yes.
himself so that you could be somebody, and you're changing people's lives, and Gil had a part to do with that because he remembered himself. And so if you're struggling with insecurity, self-hatred, you're struggling with not feeling very important about yourself, why these people that fought in wars and gave their lives for us, they did it because you're valuable, and we need you on the planet. We need you here. And so with that, I'm going to read Patton's quote one more time. Anything you want to say about that, Joe, before I read this quote?
I want to respond to that quote and based on what we've talked about. I have a thought
All
to
right.
tag on before we close.
It is foolish, General George S. Patton. It is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men and women lived.
Mm. So here's what I want to leave the audience with is that how do we really honor the men and women that have died for us, for our freedom, not just for our country, but for us personally, to enjoy those freedoms by enjoying those freedoms. The reason
Yeah.
my uncle Gil gave his life and suffered was so that his daughter and his nephew and his nieces and his everybody that lives in his country could enjoy the freedoms that he knew was worth dying for. So I've often heard this is why George Patton's quote just hits me so hard is that I heard Sadhguru once say, he said, when somebody dies, oftentimes we get stuck in this grief in the morning and like, how can I move on? How can I live without, maybe I'm dishonoring the memory of this departed loved one. And Sadhguru says to this person in the live audience, what would that person want for you? Well, they'd want me to live. What would they want for you? They want me to be happy. They would want me to, he said, so their will, he's saying, so their will for you would be to have an amazing life. Is that right? Yes. So honor their will. It's almost like execute their will. The will of Uncle Gil and all the soldiers who've died is that we would live into the freedom that they died for, right? So that's why George Patton's quote is so important because mourning them that's not what my Uncle Gil wants. He doesn't want me to live in mourning. He wants me to live in freedom and joy and happiness and do all the things that I can do now because he and all of his compadres
Yeah.
sacrificed their life. So all that to say, anything that we do to celebrate, do it with great gusto. Celebrate it with the remembering that came with a price. And by celebrating, we're actually honoring those who gave it
Right.
all so that
They don't
we
want us to
could.
feel guilty.
No, they want us
Right.
to live. They want us to live
And I love that
wholeheartedly.
whole the will of Uncle Gil. We should call this the will of Uncle Gil.
The will of
And
Gil.
all those that fought for us is because you are valuable. You who are listening to this, you are valuable. And the will of Uncle Gil is that you would live. So honor their lives by living. And
Yes.
when you're going to party at Memorial Day, then party well. Eat an extra burger for Uncle Gil. The will of Uncle Gil. So thanks for joining us on this
Yes.
happy half hour. We're so excited that this will be something that we're going to do on the regular. That's the plan. And I hope everything turned out all right with the settings and everything because was new to us. It took us about an hour to figure. It should have taken us that long. Maybe we're just too old. I don't know. But Joe, thanks for joining us. Check out Joe's stuff at mojo.studio and everything is there. That's his webpage, mojo, MOJOE studio. And you can find me at HappyLife.studio as well. Thanks for listening. You're amazing.
All right. Peace out.
Peace in.